Tara Monroe, a veteran flight attendant at Skyline Airlines, ruled her first-class cabin with unchallenged authority, until one fateful flight shattered her perfect order. As she patrolled the pristine cabin, a well-dressed mother with a baby stepped aboard, disrupting her sacred realm. What began as a routine boarding turned into a dramatic showdown that questioned everything Tara believed. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Ring the bell to support our channel. Tara Monroe had built her reputation over years of serving as one of Skyline Airlines' most seasoned flight attendants. In the pristine first-class cabin, where every detail was meticulously maintained, Tara felt most at home. With a crisp uniform and an air of unwavering confidence, she believed that her authority was absolute, a truth that everyone in first class was meant to acknowledge. Every flight, Tara patrolled the cabin like a guardian of order. Her keen eyes missed nothing: the neat arrangement of personal items, the precise temperature settings, and the quiet hum of satisfaction from well-tended passengers. She took pride in maintaining an environment of luxury and decorum. In her mind, any disruption to that serene order was an affront to her professionalism. Tara had long learned that first-class travelers expected not only comfort but a seamless, refined experience, and she was determined to provide it. For her, this role was more than a job, it was a calling. Her confident stride down the aisle, her firm tone when addressing issues, and even the subtle glances that conveyed, "I'm in charge here," were all part of the persona she meticulously cultivated. In Tara's eyes, first class was a kingdom where every rule was sacred, and she was the undisputed queen. Her colleagues admired her for her efficiency and dedication, and many passengers took comfort in the assurance that Tara Monroe was on duty. Yet, beneath that calm exterior, there was an intensity, a readiness to correct any deviation from her strict standards. Tara's approach was both admired and feared. She believed that to maintain the flawless image of Skyline Airlines, every detail had to conform to an unyielding order, and she was the one to enforce it without question. Her daily routine was methodical. Before each flight, Tara would review the cabin layout and meticulously check that every seat was assigned correctly. She knew the names of the regular travelers and prided herself on remembering small details about their preferences. For Tara, being in first class wasn't just a matter of protocol, it was a personal triumph. Her authority was not something to be shared, it was a mantle she wore with pride, ensuring that nothing disrupted the perfection she strived to uphold. On this particular day, as the plane prepared for boarding, Tara's gaze swept over the elegant cabin. Every seat was in place, every tray table polished, and every passenger exuding confidence. She felt a familiar surge of satisfaction knowing that she was about to ensure that order reigned supreme once again. For Tara, this was more than routine, it was a reaffirmation of her expertise and control, a moment to remind everyone in first class that her standards were the only ones that mattered. Little did she know, however, that the calm certainty she relied on would soon be challenged in ways that would force her to confront her own rigid assumptions. As boarding commenced, Tara Monroe's confidence remained unshaken. With practiced precision, she walked down the aisle, greeting passengers and ensuring that the first-class cabin maintained its impeccable appearance. Every detail was accounted for, until her eyes landed on an unexpected sight at the front of the cabin. A woman, carrying a small baby in her arms, was stepping through the entrance with a hesitant smile. The woman's outfit, though neat, did not exude the same polished luxury typical of first-class travelers. For Tara, who prided herself on preserving an exclusive atmosphere, this was immediately disconcerting. The woman, whom we shall call Marina Collins, clutched a first-class boarding pass tightly in her hand. Accompanying her was her infant, whose soft coos and occasional whimpers filled the air, a sound that, to Tara, was an unwelcome disruption in this haven of refined tranquility. Without missing a beat, Tara's eyes narrowed slightly. In her mind, first class was reserved for those who upheld a standard of silence and decorum, and a baby, with its unpredictable nature, did not fit that image. Approaching Marina with a firm step and an air of authority, Tara said, "Excuse me, ma'am. I see you have a first-class ticket, but I must inform you that our policy does not accommodate infants in this section. Please proceed to economy class immediately." Her tone was measured, yet edged with disapproval. Marina's eyes widened in confusion. She clutched her boarding pass and the baby even tighter, clearly taken aback by the sudden reprimand. "I'm sorry, but my ticket clearly shows first class," Marina replied, her voice calm yet tinged with concern. "I've paid for the comfort of my seat, and my baby is quiet, she hasn't caused any disturbance." But Tara was unmoved. In Tara's view, the very presence of a baby in first class was unacceptable, regardless of how peaceful the child behaved. Tara's conviction was rooted in years of tradition and strict adherence to protocols. To her, the rules were clear, and there was no room for exceptions. "I understand your situation, but our regulations are in place for the comfort of all passengers," Tara stated firmly. "I must insist that you relocate to economy class immediately." Marina's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Other passengers began to notice the exchange. Some cast sympathetic glances toward Marina, while others looked on with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense as whispers spread like wildfire. Marina tried to reason with Tara, explaining that she had booked the first-class ticket in good faith and that her baby, though young, was calm and well-behaved. "Please, I don't want to cause any trouble," Marina pleaded softly. "I just want to enjoy my flight as I paid for." Tara's expression remained unyielding. In her eyes, the rules were absolute, and any deviation from them was a disruption to the sanctity of first class. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but if your baby continues to make any noise or if there's any disturbance, I will have no choice but to take further action," Tara warned, her voice steady but laced with a hint of threat. The situation escalated as other crew members watched silently, and a palpable tension hung in the air. Marina's attempts to clarify that her baby was quiet only intensified Tara's resolve. The strict boundary between the privileged realm of first class and the rest of the plane was being enforced with an iron hand, and Marina's presence challenged that boundary. Throughout the interaction, Marina remained calm and respectful, despite the public humiliation and the stares from fellow passengers. Her quiet determination to assert her rights highlighted a stark contrast to Tara's rigid enforcement of outdated policies. The exchange, though brief, left an indelible mark on everyone present. For Marina, it was a moment of standing up for her dignity, while for Tara, it was a test of her authority, one that would soon have repercussions far beyond the confines of that fateful flight. As the announcement for final boarding echoed through the cabin, Marina hesitantly gathered her belongings, her heart heavy with disappointment. Tara, still in full control of the situation, believed she had maintained order, oblivious to the storm that was beginning to brew beyond the first-class cabin's polished surfaces. If you found these insights compelling, please comment on the video, tell us where you're watching from, like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to stay updated on our latest content. Your support makes all the difference. Veronica Sharp prided herself on her unyielding control over the first-class cabin of Aurora Air. For years, she had been the authority figure who ensured that every detail in the luxurious cabin was impeccable and every rule was enforced without exception. In her eyes, first class was a sanctum reserved for those who upheld the standards of refined travel, a haven where any disruption was intolerable. On one particular flight, as the boarding process unfolded and the cabin buzzed with hushed conversations and the soft rustle of premium amenities, Veronica's practiced gaze swept over the elegant interior. Every seat was in pristine order, the overhead compartments neatly arranged, and the ambient lighting perfect for relaxation. It was a day like any other for Veronica, until she noticed a new passenger making her way into the cabin. At the entrance stood Ophelia Rivera, a well-dressed mother carrying her infant daughter, whom she cradled tenderly. Ophelia's outfit was neat and understated, a tasteful blazer paired with crisp trousers, and she held a first-class boarding pass with quiet confidence. Yet, to Veronica, something about this scene was immediately unsettling. In her experience, first class was not meant for passengers with the unpredictable presence of an infant. To Veronica, the soft cooing and occasional whimper of a baby were an intrusion into the tranquil order of her domain. Without delay, Veronica stepped forward, her posture rigid and her tone measured but firm. "Ma'am," she announced, addressing Ophelia as she approached the row of seats. "I need to remind you that our policy in first class does not accommodate infants. I'm afraid you will have to relocate to the economy section." Ophelia's eyes widened in disbelief as she clutched her boarding pass closer. "But I booked this seat in first class," she replied calmly, though a hint of confusion crept into her voice. "My ticket confirms it, and my baby, she is very quiet. I haven't caused any disturbance." Veronica's lips tightened imperceptibly. In her strict view, the mere presence of a baby, no matter how well behaved, was a disruption to the premium experience that other passengers expected. "I'm sorry, but rules are rules," Veronica insisted. "First class is intended for passengers who can maintain the environment we guarantee. I must warn you, if your baby continues to make any noise, you will be asked to move to another seat immediately." The announcement cut through the ambient hum of the cabin, drawing the attention of several nearby passengers. Some looked on with sympathetic expressions, while others exchanged curt glances. Ophelia's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. She had not expected to be confronted in such a manner. "I understand your concern," she said gently, "but my baby is calm. I assure you, she isn't causing any trouble." Veronica's eyes remained steely. "I must insist that you keep the baby completely silent," she replied. "If there is any further sound, no matter how minor, I will have no alternative but to escalate this matter." Her voice, though low, carried an unmistakable edge. To Veronica, any disruption was unacceptable, and she felt personally responsible for upholding the sanctity of the cabin's tranquility. Inside the cabin, tension began to build. Passengers who had been enjoying the quiet luxury of their first-class experience now found themselves witness to a public confrontation. The atmosphere shifted from refined calm to an undercurrent of unease and curiosity. A few passengers furtively recorded the exchange on their smartphones, while others leaned forward in their seats, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Ophelia's heart pounded as she struggled to reconcile the polite composure she maintained with the sting of public reproach. "I have paid a premium for this seat," she said, her tone respectful yet firm. "I expect to enjoy my flight without being treated as if I'm an interloper." Veronica's response was unyielding. "Rules apply equally to all, and I'm afraid that in this instance, the rules dictate that you cannot remain in first class with an infant." She paused, as if to emphasize her authority, before adding, "I strongly advise you to ensure your baby remains quiet, or I will have to take further action." The standoff continued for several tense moments. Ophelia's eyes searched Veronica's face, seeking any sign of leniency, while Veronica maintained her steely gaze. The situation had become more than a simple enforcement of airline policy, it had evolved into a test of dignity and respect. In the eyes of the other passengers, the unfolding scene was both disturbing and, for some, indicative of an underlying bias. Whispers began circulating, and the cabin air grew heavy with anticipation of what might come next. In that charged moment, the weight of tradition and regulation clashed with the modern realities of travel. For Ophelia, the confrontation was not just about a seat, it was about her right to enjoy the comfort she had purchased and the freedom to travel with her child without undue judgment. For Veronica, the situation was a matter of preserving an established order, one that she believed ensured the optimal experience for all first-class travelers. But as the minutes stretched on, it became evident that neither side was willing to yield easily. Ophelia, with a quiet determination, repeated her assertion that her ticket was valid and that her baby had been silent thus far. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but my ticket confirms my seat in first class. I simply wish to enjoy my flight in peace." Her voice wavered, betraying both her resolve and the mounting anxiety that this public dispute was spiraling out of her control. Veronica's reply was curt. "I'm sorry, but I cannot allow any disruption here." The tone left little room for negotiation, and the passengers around them watched with bated breath. Some seemed to sympathize with Ophelia's plight, while others, perhaps loyal to the rigid rules Veronica upheld, maintained a silent distance. In that moment, the conflict became a microcosm of larger societal tensions. Here, within the confined space of a luxury aircraft, the clash between strict adherence to outdated protocols and the evolving needs of modern travelers played out in real time. The once unchallenged authority of a seasoned flight attendant was now under scrutiny, and the stakes were far higher than a simple seat reassignment. By the time the cabin crew finished their next round of service, it was clear that the incident would not be resolved quietly. The tension, the whispered opinions, and the recording devices all testified to the fact that something significant had been set in motion. Ophelia, though visibly distressed, resolved to stand her ground. For her, this confrontation was about more than just a rule, it was about her dignity and her right to travel without being ostracized. As the flight progressed, the memory of the heated exchange lingered in the minds of everyone on board. The incident had cast a long shadow over what was meant to be a peaceful journey. And while Ophelia hoped that calm might eventually prevail, the seed of discord had been firmly planted, a seed that would grow and have repercussions far beyond the confines of that flight. Shortly after the initial standoff, a small, nearly imperceptible sound, a soft cry from the baby, rang out in the cabin. Though only a brief interruption, it was enough to shatter the fragile calm that had settled after the first confrontation. For Veronica Sharp, who prided herself on maintaining order at all costs, this was the tipping point. Veronica's eyes immediately narrowed as she heard the sound. Her mind raced through her strict policies and unwavering beliefs about what first-class etiquette demanded. To her, any noise was an unacceptable disruption. Without hesitation, she strode back to the area where Ophelia Rivera sat, her baby now slightly fussy. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted palpably, whispers turned into quiet murmurs as passengers braced themselves for what they knew was coming next. "Ma'am," Veronica said sharply, addressing Ophelia once again as she approached. "I must insist that your baby remain silent. If the disturbance continues, I will have no alternative but to move you to another seat, one that is more appropriate for your situation." Ophelia, though already stressed by the earlier encounter, felt her heart sink at Veronica's cold words. "I'm doing everything I can," she replied, her tone both apologetic and defensive. "My baby is trying to settle down. I understand your concern, but I have every right to be in this seat, and I've paid for the comfort of traveling in first class." Veronica's expression remained unyielding, her stance rigid as if carved from stone. "Rules are rules, and I must enforce them," she responded. "I understand you're upset, but if there is another sound, even the slightest cry, I will have to take further action." The warning echoed throughout the cabin. Passengers nearby exchanged uneasy glances. Some seemed to side with Veronica's adherence to protocol, while others silently empathized with Ophelia's predicament. The tension was so thick that one could almost taste it in the recycled air of the aircraft. For Ophelia, the repeated confrontation was deeply humiliating. She had expected a smooth journey, an escape from the stresses of everyday life, and instead, she was thrust into a situation where her right to travel in comfort was questioned time and time again. "I'm really sorry," Ophelia said softly, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I truly am. My baby is just unsettled right now, but she'll quiet down. I promise there will be no further disturbance." Veronica's eyes flashed momentarily with irritation, but she maintained her stern tone. "I have already given you ample warning. I must remind you that if there is any further noise, I will be forced to reassign your seat. I cannot allow any disruptions in this exclusive cabin." Her voice, though measured, carried an unmistakable ultimatum. At that moment, a hush fell over the cabin. The conflict had now escalated from a mere enforcement of policy to a confrontation that exposed deeper prejudices. Some passengers began to murmur their disapproval of the relentless enforcement of an inflexible rule, while others simply looked on, anxious about the brewing storm. Ophelia's frustration mounted with each passing second. "Please understand," she pleaded, "I didn't choose this flight to be humiliated in front of everyone. I booked this ticket with the expectation of receiving the comfort I paid for. I'm trying my best here." Her voice wavered, but her determination was evident in her eyes. She refused to be cowed by the rigid enforcement that had already upended her plans. Veronica, however, was not swayed by Ophelia's appeals. In her mind, the integrity of first-class service was at stake. "I'm sorry if you feel humiliated," Veronica said coldly. "But I have a duty to maintain order. Any further disturbance, and I will have no choice but to reassign your seat to a less regulated section of the aircraft." The standoff lasted for what seemed like an eternity. The baby's soft cries, barely audible yet entirely significant, punctuated the silence like a metronome marking time. With each sound, the tension in the cabin grew. Passengers who had been silently observing now leaned in, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. A sense of collective discomfort filled the space, as if everyone knew that this incident was not just about a noise, it was about respect, entitlement, and the fragile balance between policy and empathy. Inside her own thoughts, Veronica grappled with a flicker of doubt. Had she been too rigid in her application of the rules? Was her determination to enforce first-class decorum clouding her judgment? Yet, every time that thought surfaced, she pushed it away, convinced that she was merely upholding the standards that had been set for years. Meanwhile, Ophelia's resolve began to harden. Though deeply shaken by the relentless warnings, she realized that she had to stand up for herself and her child. "I assure you," she said firmly, "that I will do everything in my power to ensure my baby remains quiet. But I ask that you also consider that we have the right to enjoy the service we paid for without being treated as if we're an inconvenience." Her tone was calm but resolute, a quiet defiance against the harshness of the situation. At that moment, a ripple of murmurs began to spread among the nearby passengers. Some nodded in silent agreement with Ophelia, while others shook their heads in disapproval of Veronica's uncompromising stance. The conflict had reached a fever pitch, and the cabin's energy shifted dramatically as all eyes seemed to be on the two women at the center of the confrontation. Veronica's face reddened with a mix of indignation and stubborn resolve. "I'm simply following protocol," she retorted sharply. "If you have any issues with that, perhaps you should address it with the management." Her voice, though raised slightly, carried an air of finality, a declaration that there would be no further negotiation. The atmosphere was electric with tension as the flight continued. Ophelia sat back, her heart heavy but her spirit unyielding, as the conflict hung in the air. The baby, now quiet for the moment, remained cradled in her arms, symbolizing both the innocence caught in the crossfire and the burden of having to fight for her rights in a space meant for privilege. Over the next several minutes, the silence of the cabin was punctuated only by the soft hum of the engines and the occasional rustle of a passenger's seat adjustment. The confrontation had become a defining moment for everyone on board, a stark reminder that even in the most luxurious and controlled environments, the clash between rigid rules and personal dignity could erupt into a public spectacle. For Ophelia, this was more than just an isolated incident. It was a testament to the challenges faced by those who dared to assert their rights in the face of an inflexible system. For Veronica, it was a moment that would force her to confront the limits of authority and the inherent dangers of allowing prejudice to guide one's actions. As the flight moved steadily toward its destination, both women stood as symbols of a broader struggle, a struggle between order and compassion, tradition and progress, authority and fairness. In the end, the escalating tension in the cabin left an indelible mark on everyone present. The unresolved conflict, the silent judgment of the onlookers, and the palpable strain in the air signaled that the issue was far from over. Both Ophelia and Veronica would carry the memory of this confrontation long after the flight had landed, each changed in their own way by the harsh encounter, each forced to reckon with the consequences of standing firm in their beliefs. Veronica Sharp had spent years cultivating an image of unwavering authority aboard Aurora Air's first-class cabin. Every flight, every meticulous detail, from the pristine seat covers to the perfectly arranged amenities, was a stage upon which she performed her role as the unchallenged enforcer of order. For Veronica, first class was her kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist. No deviation from the strict standards was allowed, every passenger was expected to conform, and she was always ready to remind them whose word was final. On this day, however, as the boarding process was nearly complete and the cabin had settled into its customary hush of refined comfort, a disturbance was brewing that would upend Veronica's carefully constructed world. It began with a routine interaction that would soon become anything but ordinary. At the front of the cabin, a woman named Ophelia Rivera, a graceful, dignified traveler with an understated elegance, had just taken her seat, accompanied by her infant daughter. Ophelia's boarding pass clearly indicated a reservation in first class, yet something in her presence unsettled Veronica. To Veronica, who prided herself on a rigid definition of who belonged in her carefully maintained domain, the unexpected sight of a mother with a baby challenged the very fabric of first-class exclusivity. Veronica had already made her disapproving assessment. In her mind, first-class service was meant for those who upheld a silent, refined standard. Even the slightest disruption was unacceptable. Earlier in the flight, she had sternly directed Ophelia to move to a lower-class section. Though the confrontation had escalated into a public scene, Veronica had persisted, unwavering in her belief that her rules, must be enforced at all costs. Now, as the tension in the cabin simmered and whispers passed between curious passengers, an unexpected call over the intercom disrupted the uneasy silence. "Veronica Sharp, please report to the cockpit immediately," came the measured voice of Captain Gregory Holt. A chill ran down Veronica's spine. It was rare for a matter like this to be escalated to the captain's level. With a heavy heart and a mind still reeling from the earlier confrontation, she stepped away from her post and made her way briskly toward the cockpit. Each step felt weighted with apprehension. She had always taken pride in her ability to manage difficult situations, she was known for her steadfast control and unyielding resolve. Now, however, uncertainty gnawed at her confidence. Inside the cockpit, Captain Holt greeted her with a stern yet calm expression. "Veronica," he said, his tone measured, "we need to discuss an incident that occurred in the cabin." He paused, as though choosing his words with care. "I have reviewed the passenger manifest, and it appears there is a discrepancy regarding one of the passengers you recently confronted." Veronica's pulse quickened. She tried to recall every detail of the earlier confrontation, every word she had uttered with certainty. "Captain, I followed all protocols. I was enforcing the rules, there was a mother with a baby causing a disturbance in first class. I believed I was protecting the comfort of our passengers," she replied, her voice steady but laced with defensiveness. Captain Holt's eyes softened slightly as he leaned forward. "Veronica, I understand you have a duty to maintain order, but I have some information that might change your perspective on today's events." He reached for a document on the console and slid it across to her. "This is the passenger manifest and booking details for the individual you confronted. Please take a moment to review it." Veronica's eyes scanned the document. As she did, her heart began to pound, and a sinking realization crept in. The manifest clearly listed the name Ophelia Rivera, but next to her name, there was a notation that caught Veronica's attention, a note indicating that Ophelia is not an ordinary passenger. "Captain Holt," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly, "this shows, it says here that Mrs. Rivera is the wife of James Carter." The captain nodded gravely. "That's correct. Mr. James Carter is the owner of Aurora Air. Mrs. Rivera is not just a regular traveler, she is part of the Airline's family." In that moment, Veronica felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. All her previous certainty dissolved into shock and disbelief. The woman she had so resolutely reprimanded for simply having a baby with her in first class was the wife of the man who owned the very airline for which she worked. For years, Veronica had prided herself on enforcing the rules without question, confident that her authority was absolute. Now, she realized that her actions might have crossed a boundary that could not be undone. A torrent of conflicting emotions surged within her, shame, regret, and a deep, gnawing fear of the consequences. How could she have been so blind? She had allowed her personal prejudices to cloud her judgment, and in doing so, she had affronted not only a distinguished passenger but also the owner of Aurora Air himself. Her mind raced back to the earlier moments, the curt tone, the unyielding demand to relocate, the cold warning about keeping the baby quiet. All those moments now seemed tinted with a bitter irony. If only she had known, she might have approached the situation differently. Captain Holt watched her silence with a mix of disappointment and measured understanding. "Veronica, I'm not here to cast blame, but you must understand that this incident is not only a violation of our protocols, it is a serious matter for the company. You were enforcing a rule, yes, but in doing so, you overlooked critical details. In a service industry like ours, discretion and sensitivity are as important as strict adherence to policy." Veronica's throat tightened. I thought I was protecting the sanctity of first class," she stammered. "I believed that maintaining a quiet environment was paramount. I never intended to disrespect anyone, especially not someone of Mrs. Rivera's stature." Captain Holt's gaze was firm. "Intentions aside, the impact is undeniable. The way you handled the situation has already drawn significant attention. There are whispers among the passengers, and once we land, this matter will be scrutinized by higher management. I must ask you to reflect deeply on this and understand that sometimes, our personal judgments can have far-reaching consequences." Veronica's mind swirled as she tried to process the gravity of the revelation. She remembered the countless flights where she had asserted her authority without a second thought, confident in her ability to control any situation. But this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. The revelation that Ophelia Rivera was the wife of James Carter, the man who built and owned Aurora Air, cast a long shadow over her entire career. Her hands trembled as she clutched the manifest, and a wave of remorse crashed over her. I'm so sorry," she whispered, though to whom, she wasn't certain. "I should have verified, I should have been more understanding." Her voice broke as she struggled to articulate the regret that had taken root in her heart. Captain Holt's tone softened a bit further. "Veronica, I hope you understand that this isn't just about one incident. It's about ensuring that every passenger is treated with dignity, regardless of circumstances. Your actions today have not only affected the Carter family, they've also reflected poorly on our airline's commitment to respect and service." In that charged moment, Veronica's inner world was a storm of regret and self-reproach. She thought of the countless hours spent enforcing rules and the pride she had taken in her steadfastness. Now, all that was undercut by the realization that her rigid enforcement had, in fact, caused harm. The once unchallenged authority she wielded was now in question, and the future of her career, and her reputation, hung in the balance. Captain Holt continued, "We will have to document this incident thoroughly and submit a report to the upper management. I advise you to prepare yourself for the consequences, Veronica. It is my hope that you can use this as a learning experience and grow from it. Mistakes happen, but it's how we respond to them that defines us." Veronica nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes as the full weight of her mistake settled in. Every moment of the confrontation replayed in her mind, the dismissive tone, the curt warning, and the uncompromising stance she had taken without questioning her own assumptions. Now, confronted with the undeniable truth that she had disrespected a highly influential member of the airline's family, she felt utterly exposed. For a long, painful moment, silence reigned in the cockpit. Veronica knew that her world had changed irreversibly. The validation she had clung to for so long, the certainty of her own authority, had been shattered. In its place was a raw, unsettling vulnerability. She was forced to reckon with the fact that her actions were not isolated errors but symptomatic of a broader failure to balance discipline with empathy. Captain Holt's final words echoed in her ears as he prepared to leave the cockpit. "Take this time to reflect, Veronica. Our industry demands not just strict adherence to rules, but a commitment to fairness and compassion. I hope you find the strength to make amends." Left alone with her thoughts and the tangible evidence of her misjudgment, Veronica sank into a chair. The document in her hand, the manifest that now symbolized her downfall, seemed to mock her. In that moment, she resolved that if there was any chance to salvage what remained of her dignity, it would begin with an honest confrontation of her own biases. She would need to face the repercussions of her actions and work toward a transformation, a process that would not be easy, but one that was essential if she was ever to be worthy of the trust placed in her by Aurora Air. As the plane continued its descent, the future loomed uncertain. Veronica's path forward was shrouded in the consequences of her hasty actions, and she knew that the coming hours and days would be filled with inquiries, reviews, and, ultimately, accountability. Yet, deep within her, amidst the storm of regret and self-reflection, there flickered a small hope, that this painful experience might eventually serve as a catalyst for growth and change. But for now, she was left to face the reality that her authority, once considered unassailable, had been irreparably compromised. If you found this story meaningful, please like, comment on the video, and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to ring the bell to stay updated on our latest content. Your support makes all the difference. Veronica Sharp's world had shattered long before the plane even touched down. In the tense hours of the flight, the reverberations of her earlier actions had grown from a simple breach of protocol into a profound personal reckoning. Now, as Aurora Air's flight number 407 began its final descent, Veronica was forced to confront the full weight of her decisions, a confrontation that would ultimately determine the future of her career and her very sense of self. The cabin had been filled with an undercurrent of discomfort since the incident with the Rivera family. The Rivera family, led by Ophelia Rivera, a dignified, soft-spoken woman traveling with her infant daughter, had been treated harshly by Veronica when she insisted that they leave their premium cabin seats. Veronica had been so convinced of her authority and so certain that the rules she had long enforced were absolute that she had not paused to consider the real cost of her actions. Now, as the plane began its descent toward its destination, the reality was clear. Veronica's rigid enforcement had hurt not only a family but also the reputation of Aurora Air. Inside the narrow cockpit, Captain Gregory Holt had already briefed the management team about the unfolding crisis. His measured tone had carried a blend of disappointment and resolve when he informed Veronica of the discrepancies in the booking manifest. A manifest that revealed Ophelia Rivera was not an ordinary passenger, but the wife of James Carter, the very owner of Aurora Air. That revelation had struck Veronica like a lightning bolt, shattering her self-assured facade and plunging her into a state of deep remorse. Now, sitting alone in the cramped crew office after being escorted off the flight, Veronica's thoughts spiraled relentlessly. The door to the small, sterile room seemed to close in around her as she reviewed the events in her mind. She recalled every word, every tone of voice, every dismissive gesture she had made towards the Rivera family. What had once seemed like a routine enforcement of regulations now appeared to her as a series of harsh, unforgiving actions driven by a bias she had never admitted to herself. The minutes ticked by, each one heavy with the hum of the airport's distant activity. Veronica's phone lay on the desk, its screen aglow with notifications, tweets, posts, and hashtags such as hashtag Justice for Rivera and hashtag Sharp Out of Control flashing before her eyes. The digital world had not been kind. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation had recorded every moment, and the video had spread like wildfire, exposing her to a public that was quick to judge and slow to forgive. Every comment stung, every share deepened the sense of isolation that now enveloped her. In a moment of painful clarity, Veronica thought back to the very beginning of her career. She had joined Aurora Air with passion and determination, eager to enforce high standards and provide a luxurious, seamless travel experience. For years, she had taken pride in her ability to command respect and ensure order. Yet, as she now reflected, she realized that the authority she had wielded so ruthlessly was built on an unexamined foundation, one in which assumptions about who belonged in first class were never questioned. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the door. It was Ethan Ward, a senior crew member who had long been a mentor to Veronica. His presence, usually reassuring, now only served as a reminder of the consequences of her actions. He stepped into the room with a heavy sigh, his face etched with a mix of sympathy and stern resolve. "Veronica," Ethan began, his tone quiet but carrying undeniable weight, "we need to talk about what happened today. You know why you're here, and you know that your actions have consequences far beyond what you might have imagined." Veronica looked up, her eyes red and weary. "I know, Ethan," she said softly. I let my assumptions get the better of me. I didn't think. I never thought it would come to this." Ethan pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. "You were one of our best for years. You upheld our standards with pride, and for a long time, that made you indispensable. But today, you crossed a line that cannot be ignored. You targeted a family based solely on your interpretation of policy, and your personal bias. And now, the entire world is watching." Veronica's voice trembled as she replied, "I'm so sorry. I see it now, how I've been so blinded by the need to maintain order that I lost sight of empathy and fairness. I never intended to hurt anyone. I thought I was protecting the integrity of first class, but I realize now that I was enforcing an outdated rule with no regard for the real people behind the tickets." Ethan nodded slowly, his expression softening yet remaining resolute. "It's important that you understand that intent doesn't erase impact. The Rivera family trusted us to provide them with the comfort they paid for, and you made them feel unwanted and humiliated. And when it turns out that Ophelia Rivera is not only a first-class passenger but also the wife of our owner, the stakes are even higher." Veronica hung her head, a heavy silence filling the space between them. I feel like I've destroyed everything I've worked for. I've let down not only the Rivera family but also everyone who once trusted me, my colleagues, the passengers, and the very principles I believed in." Ethan's voice was firm yet compassionate. "This is your moment of reckoning, Veronica. Mistakes happen, we all falter sometimes. But what matters is how we choose to move forward. The company is launching a full investigation into today's events, and there will be consequences. I won't lie to you, the path ahead will be long and painful. But if you're willing to learn from this, to genuinely reflect on your biases and take steps to change, there might be a way to salvage not only your career but also your integrity." Veronica's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I want to change, Ethan. I want to understand why I reacted the way I did, and I want to make amends. I've been so blinded by the idea of order and control that I failed to see the human cost of my actions." Ethan leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "That's the first step. You need to start by apologizing, not just to the Rivera family, but to everyone who was affected by your actions. Then, you must undergo a comprehensive training program on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The airline is prepared to support you in this process if you're sincere. It won't be easy, but it's necessary." Outside the small crew office, the repercussions of the incident were unfolding rapidly. News of the confrontation had spread throughout the cabin and into the terminal. Passengers were discussing it in hushed tones, and several had already posted on social media. The hashtag Justice for Rivera had trended for hours, and Aurora Air's reputation was taking a hit. The management team was under immense pressure to show that they were taking decisive action against any form of discrimination. Veronica's personal crisis was now intertwined with the company's future. Back on the flight, as the plane began its descent, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. The Rivera family, though visibly shaken by the earlier ordeal, maintained a quiet dignity. James and Linda Rivera knew that the incident was not just about a mix-up, it was about their rights and their dignity as passengers. Their children, Ava and Lucas, sat silently, absorbing the seriousness of the situation without fully understanding its implications. For the Rivera family, the ordeal had been a stark reminder that even in spaces meant for luxury and comfort, prejudice could still rear its ugly head. Yet, despite the humiliation they had endured, they resolved to stand together and seek accountability. Their quiet determination resonated with many of the passengers who had witnessed the incident. One such passenger, a successful businessman named Robert Hayes, had already taken steps to report the incident to the airline's management. His intervention provided a glimmer of hope that justice would be served. As the plane finally touched down, Veronica's personal nightmare was far from over. The management team would soon be convening to review the entire incident, and Veronica was well aware that she would have to face the consequences of her actions. The hours that followed on the tarmac and in the deplaning area were a blur of anxious faces, stern looks from security, and the relentless murmur of discontent among the passengers. In a private meeting shortly after landing, Captain Holt and Marcus Bryant, the Director of Passenger Relations, confronted Veronica with the full details of the incident. They laid out the evidence, the passenger manifest, witness statements, and, most damningly, the viral video of the confrontation. Veronica listened in silence as they detailed the public outcry and the significant damage her actions had inflicted upon the airline's reputation. Marcus's tone was firm as he stated, "Veronica, your actions today are unacceptable. They reflect a deep-seated bias that has no place in our company. We are committed to maintaining an environment of respect and dignity for all passengers, regardless of their background. Your failure to uphold these values has not only hurt the Rivera family but has also undermined the trust that our customers place in us." The meeting was a turning point. For Veronica, it was the moment when she could no longer hide behind the veneer of authority. The weight of her mistakes was laid bare, and she knew that her future at Aurora Air was in jeopardy. Yet, amid the harsh criticism and the looming disciplinary measures, a small, flickering hope emerged, a hope that she could learn from this experience and, over time, rebuild not only her career but also her character. That night, alone in her modest hotel room near the airport, Veronica sat at a small desk and began writing an honest, heartfelt apology. Every word she penned was a raw admission of her failure, a confession of how her biases had led her astray. She wrote not only to the Rivera family, whose faces haunted her dreams, but also to herself, vowing to embark on a journey of self-improvement and reconciliation. In the days that followed, Veronica participated in intensive training sessions on diversity and inclusion. She met with counselors, engaged in difficult conversations with colleagues, and, most importantly, reflected deeply on the impact of her actions. The road to redemption was long and arduous, filled with moments of painful introspection and challenging realizations. Yet, each step was a necessary part of her transformation. Veronica knew that rebuilding trust would take time that she might never have if her career were permanently derailed. But in those quiet moments of reflection, she found a measure of solace. The process taught her that true authority did not come from rigid enforcement of rules, but from empathy, understanding, and the willingness to listen. She began to see that her role was not merely to maintain order but to ensure that every passenger felt valued and respected. Though the public scandal continued to echo across social media and in industry news, Veronica slowly started to reclaim a sense of self. She reached out to support groups within the airline industry and began speaking openly about her experience, hoping that by sharing her journey, others might learn from her mistakes. The once unyielding enforcer of order was now a figure in transition, a woman determined to evolve and to transform her legacy. In time, the fallout from the incident led to sweeping changes within Aurora Air. The management team, recognizing that the problem was not isolated, overhauled their training programs and introduced new policies aimed at fostering a culture of inclusion and respect. Veronica's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even those who wield authority must remain humble and open to change. As the months passed, Veronica worked tirelessly to prove that she had learned from her missteps. Though the scars of that fateful flight would never completely fade, she embraced them as lessons, a constant reminder that personal growth often comes through our most difficult moments. In the end, Veronica Sharp's journey was not just about a public humiliation, it was about the possibility of redemption. It was a story of falling from grace and, with great effort, rising again, stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Veronica Sharp had long prided herself on her unchallenged authority in Aurora Air's first-class cabin. For years, she had navigated the aisle with an air of certainty, her crisp uniform and steely gaze ensuring that every passenger knew who was in charge. Her routine was sacred, and nothing, no matter how trivial it might seem to others, could ever shake the unyielding order she enforced. Yet on this fateful flight, an unexpected revelation was about to expose the cracks in her carefully constructed persona. Earlier in the journey, Veronica had taken issue with a passenger named Ophelia Rivera, a poised woman traveling with her infant daughter. Veronica had been quick to judge, in her eyes, a baby did not belong in the refined atmosphere of first class. Despite Ophelia's insistence and the validity of her first-class ticket, Veronica had unceremoniously ordered her to relocate to economy. In her mind, she was simply upholding the long-standing rules of luxury travel. She was determined to maintain the serene order that defined first class, even if it meant making unpopular decisions. For Veronica, the rules were absolute. She had been raised on the notion that first-class service was reserved for those who could quietly enjoy their journey without disruption. Nothing could compromise that experience, and certainly not the unpredictable coos and cries of a baby. Veronica's conviction had been as strong as ever, until the unexpected occurred. As the flight continued, the air in the cabin grew thick with tension and hushed whispers. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation exchanged knowing looks, and the murmurs in the cabin hinted at more than just a minor dispute over seating arrangements. It was during a routine check of the cabin's manifest that Captain Gregory Holt made a decision that would change everything. Summoning Veronica to the cockpit, he calmly presented a document that made her blood run cold. The manifest revealed that Ophelia Rivera was not an ordinary passenger at all, but in fact, the wife of none other than James Carter, the very owner of Aurora Air. In that instant, Veronica's certainty crumbled. She realized that the woman she had so harshly reprimanded was far more than she appeared. She was a high-profile figure whose presence in first class was not accidental but a matter of corporate lineage. The revelation struck Veronica like a bolt of lightning. In the quiet confines of the cockpit, Captain Holt's measured voice echoed. "Veronica, I need you to review these details. It appears that Mrs. Rivera is married to Mr. Carter, the owner of Aurora Air." Veronica's hands trembled as she scanned the document. Every word confirmed her worst fear. Her actions had not only embarrassed a family but had personally affronted the highest authority in the company she had once served with pride. Inside the cockpit, silence reigned for several long minutes as Veronica wrestled with the implications of the revelation. Her mind raced back over the incident, the curt tone, the unyielding warning, the complete lack of empathy. In that moment, she realized how deeply her own arrogance had blinded her to the humanity of those she served. The rules she had so doggedly enforced now appeared rigid and callous, and she wondered how she could have been so insensitive. When Captain Holt spoke again, his voice was quiet yet carried an unmistakable weight. "Veronica, your duty is to serve all passengers with dignity. Today's events have not only caused distress to Mrs. Rivera and her family but have also jeopardized the reputation of Aurora Air. We must now address this breach of our values." Veronica's throat constricted. I believed I was maintaining order," she stammered. "I followed protocol as I understood it. I never intended to cause humiliation. But intention did not erase impact." The captain's disappointed gaze made it clear that her actions would not go unnoticed. Over the next hour, as the flight continued on its final leg, Veronica was forced to confront the fallout of her misjudgment. Whispers of discontent rippled through the cabin, and her fellow crew members began to exchange disapproving glances. The once respected enforcer now found herself isolated by the very standards she had once upheld so rigidly. Later that day, once the plane had safely landed and passengers were disembarking, Veronica was summoned to a private meeting with several senior crew members and a representative from Human Resources. In a small, stark conference room behind the terminal, she sat with her head bowed and her eyes red from exhaustion and regret. The atmosphere was heavy with the unspoken judgment of her peers. "Veronica," began Marlon James, a veteran purser known for his fairness, "we all look up to you for your dedication and your ability to manage challenging situations. But today, your conduct fell far short of what we expect from our senior staff. Not only did you single out a passenger without proper cause, but you also failed to verify the facts before acting. This is not just about enforcing rules, it's about the way you treat our passengers with respect." Veronica's heart pounded as she listened. She had been so certain of her authority, so convinced that she was upholding the sanctity of first class, that she had not paused to consider the broader implications. "I realize now," she said quietly, "that I let my own biases cloud my judgment. I acted in haste, and I caused pain to a family that deserved to be treated with dignity. I am truly sorry." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Her colleagues, many of whom had witnessed the earlier incident or heard about it through whispers in the cabin, regarded her with a mixture of pity and disappointment. One crew member, a younger attendant named Carla, spoke up. "Veronica, we've all been trained to enforce our policies. But policies are meant to serve our passengers, not to exclude or demean them. Today, you forgot that. We need to learn from this, and that starts with acknowledging our mistakes." For Veronica, the meeting was a harsh mirror reflecting back the consequences of her arrogance. She recalled every moment. The crisp orderliness of the cabin, the silent, disapproving looks from passengers, the shock in Mrs. Rivera's eyes as she was told to leave her seat. Now, each memory was a wound, a stark reminder of how she had allowed pride to override compassion. Over the following days, the scandal erupted beyond the confines of the airport. News of the incident spread rapidly via social media, and hashtags like #RespectAllTravel and #AuroraAirDignity trended for hours. Passengers, industry experts, and even members of the public weighed in on the importance of treating all travelers with respect. The repercussions for Veronica's actions were far-reaching. The management of Aurora Air launched a full investigation into the incident, and the incident became a case study in how inflexible enforcement and personal bias could damage a company's reputation. Veronica found herself isolated both professionally and personally. Former colleagues, once supportive, now avoided her. The camaraderie she had relied upon was replaced by whispers and cold shoulders. In the quiet hours after the meeting, Veronica spent long nights in her modest apartment, poring over the events in her mind. She tried to understand where she had gone wrong. It was a painful journey of introspection, questioning long-held beliefs, confronting her own prejudices, and recognizing that authority without empathy was hollow. In her solitary moments, Veronica began to draft a series of reflections, not just as a public apology but as a personal commitment to change. She acknowledged that her understanding of first-class service needed to evolve. It was not enough to maintain strict order if it meant sacrificing the humanity of those who came aboard. Through this process, she slowly began to see that true leadership meant balancing discipline with compassion, a lesson that was now etched into her very being. Her transformation was neither immediate nor easy. Veronica enrolled in professional development courses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She attended counseling sessions to confront the biases that had festered unnoticed for so long. And gradually, though the road was steep and filled with moments of painful self-doubt, she began to rebuild her understanding of what it meant to serve with dignity. As weeks turned into months, the fallout from that day became a turning point for Aurora Air as well. The company, determined to restore its image, instituted sweeping changes in its training protocols and customer service policies. Veronica's case was discussed openly as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most seasoned professionals must continuously learn and adapt. Though the public scandal would forever remain a stain on her record, Veronica resolved to let it fuel a transformation that might one day allow her to reclaim her integrity and perhaps, in time, her career. In the end, Veronica Sharp's journey through isolation and realization became a profound lesson for everyone involved. It underscored that authority without empathy is unsustainable and that personal growth often arises from our deepest failures. The once unyielding enforcer of order was now a humbled woman, determined to transform her shortcomings into strengths, hoping that her painful experience could serve as a catalyst for broader change within the industry. Unchallenged authority among the flight crew. But on this fateful flight, everything began to change in a way she could never have foreseen. It started when Serena was unexpectedly summoned to the cockpit. A terse announcement over the intercom requested her presence, and her heart pounded as she hurried down the aisle. In the cockpit, Captain Marcus Holt awaited her with a calm, yet unmistakably serious expression. He motioned for her to take a seat, and with a heavy sigh, Serena complied. The atmosphere in that confined space was charged with tension. A tension that hinted at revelations that would shake her to the core. "Serena," Captain Holt began, sliding a printed copy of the passenger manifest across the console, "I need you to review these details immediately." His tone was measured but firm. Serena's eyes darted over the document. As she read, her pulse quickened. There, prominently displayed among the names of first-class travelers, was Lydia Rivera. But what caught her attention was not just her presence, it was the note accompanying it. It stated that Mrs. Rivera was the wife of Victor Stone, the owner of Skyline Air. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Serena's carefully constructed world of rules and rigid order began to crumble. The very woman she had chastised earlier for disrupting the sanctity of first class was not merely a regular traveler, she was the spouse of the company's highest authority. Every earlier curt remark, every cold warning now resonated with bitter irony. How could she have been so certain of her judgment without verifying the facts? Serena's voice caught in her throat as she stammered, "Captain, are you saying Lydia Rivera is Victor Stone's wife?" Captain Holt nodded gravely. "Yes, that is correct. And this information alters the gravity of today's events considerably." His eyes searched Serena's face, silently asking if she understood the implications. At that moment, a flood of conflicting emotions overwhelmed her, shock, humiliation, and a dawning realization that her arrogance had blinded her to the truth. Back in the cabin, the repercussions of her earlier actions were already rippling through the flight. The Rivera family, headed by Lydia, who had maintained quiet dignity even in the face of Serena's harsh directives, sat with an expression of hurt and disbelief. The other passengers, once mere bystanders, now exchanged whispered speculations. Unbeknownst to Serena, her unfounded enforcement had not only humiliated Lydia but had set off a chain of events that threatened to destroy her career. Captain Holt continued, his tone softening just slightly. "Serena, you're expected to uphold the highest standards of service and respect. Today, your actions have not only embarrassed a family but have also jeopardized the reputation of Skyline Air. We take this very seriously." Her mind raced as she recalled the incident, the stern warning, the insistence that Lydia move to a different section despite her valid ticket, the cold, unyielding tone that brooked no discussion. Now, confronted with the truth of Lydia's identity, each memory felt like a fresh wound. I followed protocol," Serena tried to explain, her voice trembling. "I believed I was enforcing our rules. I never intended to cause such humiliation." But deep down, she knew that her protocols had been applied without due consideration of the human element. Authority, she realized, was not simply about adherence to rules, it was about empathy and the willingness to listen before acting. The revelation in the cockpit marked the beginning of Serena's public reckoning. Captain Holt informed her that management would soon review the incident, and that her actions would be scrutinized at the highest levels. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, Serena was escorted back to the cabin, where the murmurs of discontent among passengers had grown louder. As the remainder of the flight wore on, Serena's inner turmoil became almost palpable. Every time she passed by the Rivera family's row, she felt the piercing gaze of the passengers, and she could almost hear the silent accusations. The weight of her misjudgment hung over her like a storm cloud, and she began to question everything about her approach to customer service. Her earlier confidence had given way to a crushing self-doubt that no amount of routine could dispel. In the midst of this internal chaos, a confrontation erupted that Serena would never forget. Later during the flight, as the Rivera family prepared to settle in after the earlier episode, a minor disturbance, a soft, unintended cry from Lydia's baby, triggered Serena's remaining rigidity. Though Lydia had maintained a composed exterior all morning, the faint sound became, in Serena's eyes, further evidence of disruption. Unable to restrain herself any longer, Serena strode down the aisle and, in a moment of uncontrolled anger, struck Lydia across the cheek. The act was swift and shocking. Lydia recoiled, her hand instinctively reaching to her face, while the surrounding passengers gasped. The slap, though delivered in a moment of misplaced authority, sealed Serena's fate. In that instant, the quiet dignity that Lydia had exhibited transformed into an outcry for justice among the onlookers. Chaos erupted in the cabin. Some passengers demanded that Serena be held accountable, while others rushed to comfort Lydia. Amid the confusion, Captain Holt swiftly intervened. "Enough," he bellowed, his authoritative voice cutting through the clamor. The scene was now beyond repair. Within minutes, the airline's internal systems were activated. Serena's employee login was deactivated, a signal that her privileges and authority were being stripped away in real time. The management had decided that no further delay was acceptable. Her actions had not only violated company policy but had become a public scandal, one that threatened the very reputation of Skyline Air. As the plane began its final descent, the atmosphere had turned from tense to downright hostile. Passengers whispered vehemently about what they had witnessed, and some even recorded further evidence of the unfolding debacle. Serena's colleagues, who had once looked up to her as a paragon of professionalism, now avoided her with expressions of shock and disapproval. When the plane finally touched down, the situation escalated further. Airport security was called, and as passengers disembarked, Serena was escorted off the aircraft by uniformed officers. The sight was both dramatic and disheartening. A woman who had once commanded respect, now led away as a pariah, her uniform stained not just with sweat but with the bitter residue of her own hubris. Outside the terminal, the repercussions were swift and unforgiving. Victor Stone, the owner of Skyline Air, personally intervened. With a stern expression and an air of finality, he ensured that Serena was terminated on the spot, not just from that flight, but from the airline entirely. His decision was both a public statement and a personal rebuke. No one, regardless of tenure or past performance, could allow their biases to compromise the dignity of the service he had built. As news of the incident spread rapidly across social media, hashtags such as #JusticeForRivera and #SerenaOut trended for hours. Articles in major publications dissected every detail of the confrontation, and within days, Serena's career was a cautionary tale discussed in boardrooms and training sessions throughout the industry. The public outcry was overwhelming, even former supporters could no longer defend her actions. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from that fateful flight prompted sweeping changes within Skyline Air. The airline's management overhauled its training programs, emphasizing empathy, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of looking beyond rigid protocols. While many passengers hailed these changes as a step toward a more inclusive future, for Serena, it was a painful reminder of what had been lost. Stripped of her position and facing public humiliation, Serena found herself in a state of deep introspection. Alone in a modest apartment far from the bustling corridors of the airline's headquarters, she spent countless hours reflecting on her actions. Every moment of that flight, every dismissive word, every cold command, and the moment of physical violence, played over in her mind like a relentless loop. She knew that her downfall was not merely a personal failure, it was emblematic of a larger systemic issue that had long gone unchallenged. With no clear path forward in her career, Serena began to seek professional help. She enrolled in courses on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and participated in counseling sessions designed to confront and dismantle the biases she had harbored for so long. Her journey toward self-improvement was slow and fraught with pain, but it was also marked by small victories, moments of clarity that reaffirmed her desire to change. Serena started documenting her journey, writing long, honest reflections that she eventually shared in industry forums and on social media. She hoped that by exposing her vulnerabilities, she could help others avoid making the same mistakes. While many were critical of her past behavior, a small but supportive community began to form around her story. They appreciated her candid admissions and her willingness to transform her understanding of what true authority should mean. In time, Serena's personal reckoning became a catalyst for broader conversations within the airline industry. Her story was cited in training seminars and company memos as a vivid illustration of the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of empathy in customer service. The scandal that had once seemed like the end of her world gradually evolved into a powerful lesson for everyone involved. Yet, despite these small glimmers of hope, the scars of that day remained. Serena knew that the road to redemption was long, and that her reputation would never fully recover from the public humiliation she had endured. But in her darkest moments, she clung to the belief that true growth came from acknowledging one's faults and committing to change, no matter how painful the process. As Skyline Air worked to repair its image, the industry as a whole took note of the incident. Policies were revised, and new measures were introduced to ensure that every passenger, regardless of background or circumstance, received the respect they deserved. Serena's legacy, once defined solely by her rigid enforcement of order, was now intertwined with the difficult but essential work of transformation and accountability. In the end, the tale of that ill-fated flight served as a stark reminder that no one is above the need for self-reflection and growth. Authority, when wielded without compassion, can cause irreparable harm. And while Serena Blake's career in the airline industry was effectively over, her journey toward redemption, and the lessons learned along the way, would serve as an enduring testament to the power of change. As the plane taxied to the gate, the tense atmosphere in the cabin had not lifted. Every passenger was acutely aware that the earlier confrontation would leave lasting scars. For Serena Blake, every step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. Her mind churned with regret and apprehension, knowing full well that the fallout from her actions was far from over. When the aircraft came to a stop and the seatbelt sign was turned off, a collective murmur ran through the cabin. Passengers began gathering their belongings, casting occasional, somber glances toward the area where the Rivera family had been seated. Ophelia Rivera, dignified yet visibly shaken by the ordeal, gathered her baby close as her husband, Victor Stone, exchanged resolute looks with fellow travelers. The incident had sparked a storm of discontent, not just among those on board, but also across social media and within the higher echelons of Skyline Air. Outside, the terminal buzzed with activity, and security officers were already present. As Serena Blake stepped off the plane, two uniformed security personnel approached her. Their expressions were stern, leaving no room for negotiation. "Serena Blake," one of them asked in a firm, measured tone. She nodded silently, unable to meet their eyes. "You're being escorted off the flight," the officer continued. The words fell like a gavel on her career. With every step taken under the watchful gaze of the terminal's busy crowd, the gravity of the situation pressed down on her even more. For many passengers, this was not merely an incident, it was a statement. Cameras captured every moment as Serena was led away, her head bowed in humiliation. Within minutes, the footage had spread across social media, igniting a firestorm of public outrage. Hashtags like #Justice for Rivera and #Serena Blakeout trended, and the narrative was clear: a once respected flight attendant had failed spectacularly. Meanwhile, inside the terminal, Victor Stone, the owner of Skyline Air, arrived to personally assess the situation. Known for his no-nonsense approach, he quickly made his way to the area where Serena was being processed by security. With a measured tone that brooked no argument, he addressed the lead officer, "Ensure that she is permanently removed from our roster. We cannot allow such behavior to tarnish our company's reputation any further." The officer nodded, and within moments, the decision was executed. Serena's employment with Skyline Air was terminated on the spot, her access deactivated and her uniform confiscated as a symbol of the severance. The public display of accountability was both swift and uncompromising. In the eyes of many, it was the only acceptable response to the egregious breach of conduct that had taken place. As the news of her firing spread, the terminal became a stage for a mixture of reactions. Some passengers expressed relief that justice was being served, while others showed a pained recognition that such incidents were symptomatic of deeper issues in the industry. The Rivera family, though still reeling from the humiliation they had endured, found solace in the fact that the matter was being taken seriously at the highest levels. Ophelia, holding her baby close, met Victor's reassuring gaze. Together, they exchanged quiet words of support, resolved that they would not allow this ordeal to define their journey. Back in the bustling world of social media, news outlets and blogs dissected the incident with fervor. Analysts discussed the delicate balance between enforcing policy and showing empathy, and many criticized the airline for failing to foster an environment of inclusivity and understanding. The public outcry was not only a rebuke of Serena's actions but a broader call for change across the travel industry. For Serena Blake, the reality was stark and unyielding. Alone in the quiet of an airport holding area after being escorted off the plane, she sat on a cold bench and stared blankly ahead. The echo of disapproving voices and the incessant buzz of her phone, filled with messages condemning her, served as a relentless reminder of the magnitude of her missteps. Every notification was a dagger to her pride, every comment a testament to the loss of trust and respect she had once enjoyed. In those solitary moments, Serena was forced to confront the truth: her career, built over years of relentless discipline and a firm belief in the authority she wielded, had come crashing down due to a single, irreversible mistake. It was a bitter lesson in humility, a realization that true authority must be tempered with empathy and an openness to understanding the complexities of human dignity. As passengers departed and the terminal slowly returned to its usual hum of activity, the fallout of the incident continued to ripple outward. For many, the memory of that flight would serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder that no one is immune to the consequences of unchecked arrogance. For Skyline Air, it was a turning point, prompting serious introspection and subsequent changes in training and customer service protocols. In the final analysis, the dramatic and public unraveling of Serena Blake's authority was more than just a personal tragedy. It was a stark lesson for an entire industry on the importance of compassion, understanding, and the need to continuously re-examine our assumptions. And for those watching, it serves as a reminder that every action has consequences, and that respect and dignity should always be at the forefront of our interactions. If you found this story insightful, please like the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an update. Your support is truly appreciated. As the plane touched down on the tarmac, the tension that had permeated every inch of the cabin reached its climax. The Rivera family, Ophelia Rivera, her husband Victor Stone, and their 2 children, stood near the exit, their expressions a mix of relief and lingering hurt. For them, the ordeal of the flight had been more than just an inconvenience. It had been a public debasement that questioned their right to travel in comfort. Meanwhile, back in the first-class cabin, the fallout from Serena Blake's earlier actions continued to ripple through the minds of the passengers. Serena's heart pounded as the aircraft slowly taxied toward the gate. Every step she took felt laden with the weight of 1,000 as the aircraft touched down on the tarmac of Skyline Air's hub. The atmosphere was heavy with the finality of consequences. Marissa Green, the flight attendant whose actions had upended an entire flight, felt every step toward the gate echo the collapse of her once sterling career. The once respected enforcer of cabin protocol now faced a reckoning that would strip her of her authority and leave her reputation in ruins. In the cabin, murmurs of discontent had turned into audible whispers among passengers. The Rivera family, composed of Ophelia Rivera, her husband Victor Stone, and their 2 children, had endured an ordeal that left them visibly shaken. Their dignified silence and the lingering hurt in their eyes had spoken volumes about the humiliation they suffered. Across the cabin, many passengers exchanged looks of sympathy toward the Rivera family, while others cast disapproving stares at Marissa as she trudged down the aisle with the weight of public scorn upon her. Stepping off the plane, Marissa was immediately met by 2 uniformed security officers. Their stern expressions and purposeful strides left no doubt, she was to be escorted away. "Marissa Green?" one officer inquired with a measured tone. Marissa managed a faint nod, her eyes lowered in resignation. "You're being escorted off the flight," the officer stated flatly, and with that, her final moments on board were marked by a palpable silence and the murmur of disapproving voices. Outside the terminal, the reality of the situation loomed large. News cameras and smartphones captured every moment as Marissa was led through the bustling concourse. Her once proud uniform now seemed a relic of a bygone era, one tarnished by the very actions she had taken so carelessly. In the midst of the chaos, Victor Stone, the owner of Skyline Air, arrived on scene. His presence was imposing yet measured, and he swiftly made his way to the area where Marissa was being held. Without delay, Victor addressed the officers. "Ensure that Ms. Green is permanently removed from our crew roster. We cannot allow such conduct to tarnish our reputation any further." His tone brooked no argument. The decision was final, Marissa's career at Skyline Air was over. Back inside the terminal, the fallout from the incident spread like wildfire. Social media was abuzz with hashtags such as #RespectForRivera and #GreenOutOfAir, and news outlets soon picked up the story. The Rivera family's ordeal had become a symbol of injustice, prompting widespread public outcry. Passengers, industry experts, and everyday viewers condemned the incident as a stark example of how rigid enforcement and unchecked bias could lead to severe consequences. For Marissa, the onslaught of public criticism was unbearable. Alone in a quiet corner of the terminal after being formally processed by security, she sat on a cold bench, her phone buzzing incessantly with messages of outrage. Each notification was a reminder of the irreversible damage done, a damning testament to her failure to treat every passenger with the dignity they deserved. The digital world, unforgiving in its immediacy, had exposed every moment of her misjudgment, leaving her with a legacy defined by a single, catastrophic error. Inside Skyline Air's management headquarters, a special meeting was convened to address the incident. Senior executives, led by Director of Passenger Relations Marcus Bryant, discussed the broader implications of the event. They were determined that no similar incident would ever occur again. In the days that followed, the airline overhauled its training programs, emphasizing empathy, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of balanced enforcement of policies. Marissa's case became a cautionary tale, a symbol of how authority, when exercised without compassion, could spiral into public disgrace. Marissa's personal journey after the incident was one of isolation and painful introspection. In the quiet of her small apartment far from the glamorous corridors of the airline, she spent countless nights reflecting on the choices that led to her downfall. Every moment of the flight, the curt commands, the dismissive tone, the final, irreversible act, replayed in her mind. She realized that her rigid belief in her own authority had blinded her to the humanity of those she was meant to serve. True leadership, she came to understand, required not only the enforcement of rules but also the capacity for empathy and understanding. In subsequent months, while Skyline Air worked tirelessly to repair its tarnished image, Marissa attempted to rebuild a semblance of dignity. She enrolled in courses focused on diversity and inclusion, hoping to confront the biases that had led her astray. She participated in counseling sessions and, eventually, began to share her story in industry seminars as a sobering lesson on the perils of unchecked authority. Though many remained skeptical of her transformation, a small circle of former colleagues and mentors supported her earnest efforts to change. In subsequent months, while Skyline Air worked tirelessly to repair its tarnished image, Marissa attempted to rebuild a semblance of dignity. She enrolled in courses focused on diversity and inclusion, hoping to confront the biases that had led her astray. She participated in counseling sessions and, eventually, began to share her story in industry seminars as a sobering lesson on the perils of unchecked authority. Though many remained skeptical of her transformation, a small circle of former colleagues and mentors supported her earnest efforts to change. Yet, despite her attempts at redemption, the stain on her reputation remained indelible. Every time she encountered a news story or a social media post referencing the incident, she felt a renewed pang of regret. The public's judgment was unrelenting, and for Marissa, the road to forgiveness, both from others and from herself, was a steep and uncertain one. As Skyline Air slowly moved forward, the incident with Marissa Green became a turning point for the entire company. It underscored the importance of empathy in service and catalyzed a transformation in airline customer care policies. Marissa's downfall, while tragic on a personal level, sparked an industry-wide conversation about the delicate balance between authority and compassion.